On Friday, my builder comes to me and he goes, "Oh, by the way, can I have the garden design on Monday?" I'm thinking, heck, I'm really busy Saturday. That leaves me one day to design my entire garden. But in reality, it took me less than an hour. So my builder needs the design and I've got no time. But I don't panic because even though I'm not a garden designer, I am a spatial designer. And really, whether that space is inside or outside, it doesn't really matter because all the principles of how good space works apply just as much outside as they do inside. So the really interesting thing for me was the design took less than an hour. I was really surprised. But when I thought about it, I thought, actually, I'm not that surprised because in my head, I'd been designing the space for months. I'd been collecting ideas and stimulus. I always like to have a scrapbook for any project. And when I see something that I think is interesting, I just throw it in there and then I can refer back to those later. I'd definitely been paying attention to gardens that I've been involved with. Another thing that was really important to me up front was thinking about what I didn't want from a garden. Now, one of the reasons I moved from my last house is because it was a really big garden and it required so much maintenance. There was a lot of grass that got muddy in the winter, and then when the dog went out, all that mud would come back into the house. I wanted a small, intimate space. I didn't want a whole lot of maintenance, a whole lot of grass. So because I'd been so obsessed with tracking the sun in the garden, where the sun comes up in the morning, where it falls during the day, what's the very last moment I get the sun in the evening, I know that one side of my garden is like really, really sunny and gets all the sun, and the other side is pretty much in shade most of the day. So that really influenced what I was going to do. Another thing I do just naturally is I spend an awful lot of time imagining myself in the finished project, and that applies to the final house, but also the garden. So I've spent a lot of time in my head visualizing myself lying on my sun lounger in the afternoon reading a book, having my morning coffee outside, pottering with some plants in the garden, letting the dog out. And a big influence was remembering back to that small little intimate garden that I created at the front of my last property. It was small, it came off the kitchen, it captured the afternoon sun perfectly. It was really lush, it was surrounded by tall hedging for privacy, and it was just one of the favorite spaces in the house. So I very much had that in mind when I was creating this garden. So, at some level, the garden already exists. It's already there. And my job that Sunday was really just to document it. So, when I bought the house, one of the things I liked was the garden was a completely blank slate, totally grown over, no trees or plants of any interest. It was just all to be leveled, and I could start from scratch. Another great thing about the garden is there's a gate at the bottom of the garden that opens up into this area that's shared with the other houses in the row. So it's semi-private, and it's a big grassed area that kind of runs onto a river. So that like grass and river and the running around space is already catered for outside of my garden. So that allows my garden to be completely different, and I don't have to worry about grass or space for the dog. So the main starting point when I sat down was I just listed out all the different times that I want to use the garden and how I will use it. And I really challenged those. I was thinking, yeah, we're going to put a dining table in the garden. But actually, when I thought about it, I thought, I don't eat in the garden. That's not something I'm going to do. But I do want to be able to work in the garden. I can imagine myself out there with a laptop and some notes and sketching. So a workspace in the garden was a definite yes for me, not so much a dining space. So I knew I wanted an area for sun lounges, a sofa, that table for working. I also needed some kind of storage system. So I always knew that I wanted to divide the garden up into zones. I thought I'd probably have three major zones, but when I sat down and I played with it, it became very apparent that three zones was just going to be like too much. So what it's ended up is it's got the main zone at the back and then another zone by the house. And then this kind of, the third piece is just that intermediary transition zone. So I threw everything into my CAD software. It's so important to keep everything to scale. I'm not that bad at it after years of experience, but even for me, when I just sketch things out, it's really easy to go off scale. And if you go off scale just a little bit, you start to think you can fit more things in the space than you think. So I like to use the CAD software so I'm perfectly on scale. Made me realize things like the dining table was taking up a lot of space. So that led me to using a bench seat instead so I could save that space. And I pretty quickly got to a layout that I liked. It wasn't particularly complicated because I knew some of the things that had to be in place. I knew that I wanted all the living along one side where the sun was going to be. So it wasn't really that difficult. So one of the things that was really important to the house and is also going to be important to the garden is this planting zone that comes right up and into the house. Now, I am absolutely obsessed with internal courtyards. I love an internal courtyard in a house. There's just so many benefits to them. That's another video. But anyway, I couldn't have an internal courtyard in this house, but I thought, well, how can I cheat that idea? So instead of going full width with the extension, like most people would do, I have stopped the extension short so that I can run a piece of garden right up to the house. And that will get a sense of the garden coming into the house. It also allows me to have corner glazing so that I can follow the sun all the way around into the extension. So the bit of floor space I'm losing is well worth all of those benefits. So I absolutely knew that I would have this long linear piece of garden. It's going to be quite shaded, but I love ferns from New Zealand. So it's always lovely to have some ferns around me to remind me of home. I also knew I was going to have planting on the other side where the fence line is because it's a messy fence. So if I can cover that with a thick cover of evergreen planting, then I just know that's going to give a really luxurious, enveloped, lush feel as soon as you step out into the garden. By making the storage area just about fence height and long, it creates this kind of architectural moment in the garden rather than me trying to fit in a standard size shed where I'd have to think about screening it. I just love the idea of putting this long, low element along one side, along the side where it doesn't get any sun and it's not particularly usable space. And I think if I finish that in a beautiful black, it's going to blend in with the fencing as well. And then so that that doesn't just sit kind of lonely in the garden, I think a little mini version of that as the bench seating for the dining table will just make those two things work together in a really nice way. So then I was thinking about materials. And when it comes to materials, obviously I want the house and the garden to relate. But I wanted the garden to be a bit moodier, actually. I wanted it to feel a little bit more enveloping. So I chose elements out of the main house to bring into the garden. In the inside of my house, the windows are going to be a very rich walnut. So I wanted to take that finish and take it into the garden somewhere. So I thought a lovely walnut composite decking would just look beautiful. So I'd stayed in this cabin in the woods at one point, and one of the things I'd noticed there is that they had super, super simple poured concrete patios. And I just struck me at the time, what a great idea. It's simple, it's low cost, there's no kind of grouting lines to clean. So that was one of the ideas that I put in my scrapbook thinking, yeah, I'd really like to do that at my house. So one of the things I've always loved, and actually I put it in my last house as well, is I just love a stacked brick patio. So I definitely want to have the texture of a brick patio in the garden somewhere. So I've designed a little bit of space for that. And I could go and source some stunning bricks. There are amazing bricks around. However, I think what I might end up doing is using some of the bricks that we've used from demolishing the back of the house and just putting those into the garden, because once again it just creates that little bit of relationship between the house and the garden, and it's free. So I'm pretty sure that all the fences are going to be black. I am a sucker for black in the garden. I think black is just a perfect backdrop for plants. And I also think it creates this wonderful depth to the garden as well. So as much as this time in my renovation, there'll be very, very little black inside, I really want black to be quite a feature in the garden outside. So then what I did was I just threw it into ChatGPT and had a conversation, which I think is really important when you're using AI for things like this. I talked to ChatGPT about what I was going for and the type of feeling, and we had a conversation. So when ChatGPT was finally then translating that into some kind of level of visuals, it kind of had an understanding of what I was going for. Now, the thing is, the visuals that come back were not perfect. And this is the thing when you use AI, and I'm sure if you've tried it, you're like, oh, I wish it could just do what I tell it to do. But the good thing about it is it can take your ideas and it can just bring them to life. And I think you have to, at some level, get over the idea that it's not perfect and just generate a few different options. And then at least it starts to give you a feel of what the materials might look like, what the flow of the garden's going to feel like. And I think the other thing that's really helpful sometimes when I use ChatGPT or other visualization tools in this way, sometimes the imperfection of it is brilliant, because sometimes its errors, the way that it interprets things, which is not what was in my head, is actually kind of good stimulus. Sometimes I go, oh, it's done that weird thing, but actually I kind of like that weird thing. So, one of the things it did for mine is it had this line of gravel that was running up the edge of the house. And I was like, oh, I wasn't going to do that, but actually I quite like it. And when I spoke to my builder about it afterwards, he was like, oh, that's super practical. It means that when the rain falls, it's not going to fall on the garden and bounce back up onto your full height glazing. It's going to fall on the stones, and then you're not going to have the same dirty window issue. And I was like, brilliant. Brilliant. That sounds really good to me. So the stones are staying, and they came from ChatGPT just misinterpreting my drawings. So everything's stimulus, everything's kind of like, oh, can this make it better? Can this make it better? And the imperfection of AI modeling can actually be a real bonus. So what I did is I got to a stage where I was thinking, yeah, this is pretty good. I had done a few different visuals with ChatGPT. I had a layout, and I just printed everything out and put them on the table in my living room and just went about my day. I'd sit and have a coffee, I'd look at them, kind of just imagine the space, imagine me being in it. And that's when I started to think about, oh, maybe I would need to swap that and just do some little tweaks. But I like that idea of not sitting at a desk and really focusing on it, but just letting the design kind of be for a while and just noticing, tweaking whilst going about my day. One of the things I did change is originally I had the sun lounges on the morning terrace by the house, and I had the sofa at the back, which would be the evening sun. But when I really thought about how do I live, I thought, I am such a morning person. I am so active in the morning. I'm really creative. I get lots of work done. I'm up super early. And in the afternoons, I'm in a much more slow mode. So I switched those over. So now the sofa is outside in the morning sun. So that's sit up, coffee, taking some notes, thinking about things. And then the afternoon is for relaxation on the sun lounges when I find a moment to do that. But I think what happened was it was only because the sun lounges were in that position in my last house that I put them there originally. And sometimes it's so easy to do that, isn't it? It's so easy to think, oh, this is where things go and where things should be, because we're just repeating the past. But I think sometimes it's really worth really questioning those assumptions and thinking, yeah, but does this work for me now? Does this work for me in this new environment? Or is this something that I should be challenging? One other thing that I thought was interesting about getting into the garden was it really made me think about the external colour of the windows and doors for the extension in the back of the house. Now, originally, because of the surrounding houses and the sort of agreements we all have in this little area we're in, everything was going to be just this nice kind of like subtle off-white. And I wanted to continue that through. I didn't see any reason to change that for the extension. But then when I started to get into the feel of the garden and the sort of atmosphere it was creating, I thought, oh no, I think the white could be too fresh. So I had a look at some of the other colors, and I've chosen this kind of like rich taupey bronze for the outside of the doors, which I'm just in love with. I think it's a gorgeous color, and I think it's just going to make that transition into the garden from indoors to outdoors and back in again just that much kind of calmer without any sort of jarring contrasts. And luckily for me, the windows hadn't been ordered, so it wasn't too late to make that change. And so that was that. It was, I think, about an hour of my time on the Sunday. And I know the design is not perfect, it's not fully resolved, but it's an intention and it's something that I could then share with the builder. So he's happy to progress. I know things will change when him and I lay things out on site and we get very, very specific. But one of the things I've learned, and I have to remind myself of, is not to make things too perfect, not to worry about all those final details at this point, because they're going to change anyway. Some things are best worked out in the moment. I'll be able to stand in the garden and see things taking shape. So one of the things I'm not sure about at the moment is how long the big storage component at the back should be. There was an error on one of the ChatGPT drawings that shortened it, and I thought, oh, actually I quite like it a little bit shorter. But I'm not worrying too much at the moment. I think it's going to become obvious as the garden develops just how long that should be once we can stand down there and get a sense of the space. So the great news is Monday morning I shared all the designs with the builder. He's really happy. So they've started now digging up the garden, clearing all the rubble, and the garden project has officially begun. So I am super excited because now I can see that garden in my head so clearly. I can live in that garden until it becomes a reality. And it's just another part of the project that's moving on. So I am planning to make more content around the garden as it develops. So if you're interested to see how my initial concept drawings end up in reality, do follow along.